Welcome to this Food and Drink Federation hosted webinar, which will detail the requirements around the advertising of food and non-alcoholic drinks to children in non-broadcast media. So that's including traditional print media like newspapers, as well as online games and websites. My name's Kate Halliwell. I'm the Nutrition and Health Manager here at the FDF. The Food and Drink Federation represents food and drink manufacturing companies of all sizes, from household brands to small local companies. Obesity levels in the UK are unacceptably high, and our member companies have been taking action over many years to support consumers choose a healthier diet and lifestyle. Most recently, companies are working to reduce sugar levels and consider portion sizes in a range of foods. Although outside of the government's childhood obesity plan, another area of company action is the responsible advertising of food to children. The UK already has stringent advertising codes relating to foods. In particular, what can be advertised during children's television is very tightly controlled, where foods that are high in fat, sugar and salt cannot be advertised. The FDF, alongside others, has supported extending these restrictions so that all advertising is covered, whether children are watching an advert on TV, playing on social media or reading a magazine. I'm delighted to introduce Andy Taylor, the Regulatory Policy Executive at the Committee of Advertising Practice, otherwise known as CAP, who'll be taking us through in detail the new requirements in the CAP code which come into force from July 2017.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for inviting us along to talk to your members about the important issue of the new non-broadcast restrictions on HFSS products advertising, which are about to come in July this year. Today, I'm going to take you through some background as to where the rules have come from, the timetable for implementation, and then try to introduce you briefly to the sort of key elements, the key things you need to think about when you're looking to comply with the rules. Firstly, the scope of the code in general. What types of media are within the code's remit? Then this question of what is an HFSS product and what is an HFSS product advertisement. Having got those in hand, we need to then turn to the question of what the restrictions actually require, the new media placement restriction and the amended content restrictions. And then, as CAP is a body which is looking to help advertisers to get it right before they publish marketing communications, we'll be looking at the resources that we've made available for you. Firstly, just a bit of background about the self-regulatory system. We are, alongside the Advertising Standards Authority, the one-stop shop for ad regulation in the UK. The system is broadly broken into two. CAP's role is to author the UK advertising codes. In this instance, we're looking at the non-broadcast code, which relates to all advertising media except for television and radio. Television and radio are covered separately by the UK Code of Broadcast Advertising, which is authored by BCAP. The two bodies are sister bodies. They work closely together to ensure that the industry has a voice in writing the codes of practice. The key thing about the system, though, is that we have an independent enforcement body. The Advertising Standards Authority has final say on the interpretation of the codes, and it is independent, chaired by Lord Smith of Finsbury. The overall ethos of the code is to ensure that advertising remains legal, decent, honest and truthful, that we set standards which protect consumers, protect businesses alike. The system is funded by an arm's length levy on ad spend, but it is, although a self-regulatory system, mandatory. It's supported by government and the courts. So just before we go in to the meat of the presentation, just a really brief overview of what's actually happened in terms of the regulatory changes for food advertising. Firstly, CAP has had restrictions on food advertising to children in its code for quite some time. These are mostly common sense things like not encouraging kids to eat before bedtime or to eat too much, but now we are for the first time introducing dedicated restrictions on specific category of products that are high in fat, salt and sugar. Key change is a new placement restriction, i.e. where you are allowed to put your ads for HFSS products, but there are also changes to the existing rules on the use of promotions, licensed characters and celebrities in ads which are targeted through their content. CAP's rationale for introducing new rules is in response primarily to the backdrop of very significant concerns around childhood obesity and how this has a knock-on effect in terms of public health, economic and impacts on an individual level. Crucial to this, however, also is the recognition of changing media habits. Over the past 10 years, the shift towards online platforms have radically altered the way children interact with the commercial world. Advertising does not have a crucial and significant role in shaping children's diets and indeed in the wider obesity issue. The evidence points to there being a relatively small effect. However, CAP recognises that given the background, we have the potential to make some positive impact in terms of the effect on children's media habits and in terms of how advertising self-regulation plays a role in the wider efforts to tackle childhood obesity. What I should say as well is that these changes bring CAP into line broadly with what the BCAP code has required since 2007, effectively a distinction between HFSS and non-HFSS products and the implementation of a placement restriction.
And so that sounds quite straightforward almost. Let's just bring the CAP code in line with the BCAP code. But I'm sure there's actually quite a process of work to be able to get to the point we're now at.
Yes, it has been quite a long journey. There is, as I've said, there are some very significant issues with obesity and in terms of children's media habits, but that has to be set against the evidence. CAP is a highly committed evidence-based regulator. We can only act where there is a case in the evidence for us to make change, and that is work that started. We announced the process in 2015, and we carried out over the first part of 2016 a very extensive pre-consultation process with industry, government, campaign groups, public health professionals and so forth, and then we had a full public consultation process through the middle part of 2016, announcing the outcome in December last year. In terms of the timetable, the rules will come into force from the 1st of July this year. That's when the ASA will start to consider complaints it receives against those rules. Additionally, there is a period of grace if media providers can demonstrate to the ASA that they booked media space prior to the 8th of December 2016 when the announcement was made. That will give an extra 6 months and transitional period to allow advertisers to comply.
So what sorts of things would that grace period cover from a company's perspective?
It's intended to allow companies that have made quite significant long-term commitments to media budget to basically avoid a sort of a stark cliff edge. They have a bit more grace in terms of being able to continue with their marketing communication. So we're talking things like brochures where they're with a 12, 18 month lifespan. It's to ensure proportionality. We know that the industry want to focus on getting this right, but there are some who are disadvantaged by the nature of the type of communication that they're publishing. Moving on from the background and timeline here, just a quick slide and a few slides on the scope of the code. This is important as it will help you to understand the broad application of the code to your advertising, and obviously from within that to understand where the new HFSS rules will apply. Before I go into more detail on the online aspects of it, here's a list of basically a lot of the type of things you'd expect to be considered advertising, so print and press, leaflets, posters, etc., cinema ads, but also importantly a lot of things online, including your own websites and things like apps and ad for games.
It's certainly quite a comprehensive list. Could you just expand a little bit on what ambient media means?
Ambient media is anything else additional to posters and outdoor. So for instance, media appearing on bags and things like that, and it's designed to capture the fact that posters and outdoor sites are a specific form of media, but there are other forms of communication similar to that. So moving on from that slide and just focusing in on the online remit. In 2011, the ASA extended its remit to cover marketing communications appearing in advertisers' own websites and in other non-paid-for space under their control online, and that would include things like social media. This responded to quite significant concerns about the way in which the code applied to traditional media, but not to the often similar messages appearing in advertisers' own space. The ASA adopted the test which is listed in the slide here. Marketing communications that are directly connected with the supply, transfer of goods, services, opportunities and gifts are considered to be within the remit of the code. The intention here is to ring-fence communications within your own space where there is a primary intent of selling something. I would add there are lots of ways in which this can happen. It's not just a simple question of looking for things like prices, which are overt indications of commercial intent. There can be things like branding, corporate and social responsibility and so forth, which also have the effect of selling at a brand level as opposed to a specific product level. And here are two examples which are probably current at the moment. There is an increasing push towards using user-generated content toward interacting with consumers. You need to be careful when marketing, not just for the food rules, but also compliance with the code more generally. Whenever you see a piece of user-generated content, for instance, a consumer placing something or posting something on your Facebook wall or directing something at you on Twitter, that's fine, that's their content. But the second you start to manipulate that content by effectively bringing it in to your marketing communications, then you are effectively taking responsibility for the messages contained within.
So would I be right in saying then that if I was making, say, a chocolate bar and someone had tweeted about how deliciously lovely it was, if I then retweeted that as the company, that would count within the scope of the codes?
It would. You've taken that within your stable of marketing communications, so you would be responsible for the messages within that. The second part of this is apps and advert games. I think we've seen recent concerns in the food area around such games targeted at children. These are obviously created by or on behalf of brands, but they're nevertheless considered advertising. So moving on to the key question, the sort of the basis of all of this, which is how do you define what an HFSS product is? The answer is the Department of Health Nutrient Profiling Scheme, which is obviously at present used by not the broadcast code for the TV advertising restrictions. This slide briefly lays out the way that works. Effectively, it is a points-based model that requires calculation on the nutrients, the composition of that product, and ultimately foods that score 4 or more, drinks that score 1 or more are classified as HFSS. Key question from an advertiser perspective is what the ASA is going to expect. Well, simply put, the ASA operates a system which is based on reverse burden of proof. It is for you, the advertiser, to satisfy the ASA that you comply with the code. In this instance, advertisers are urged to hold evidence that they can provide to the ASA in the event of a complaint before they publish an ad.
And is there a template that companies can use to keep hold of that evidence?
There isn't a formal template, but what we would advise is basically show you're working. And if you have a list, for instance, just an A4 piece of paper which explains the composition and content of the product and shows how you've worked out the nutrient profile and arrived at the score, that type of thing in hand before you start is probably a sensible defence in case you are challenged by the ASA. I should also add that this approach is similar to the one presently in place for television advertising. Clearcast is the body which works on behalf of the broadcasters to clear broadcast advertising before it's broadcast and put on TV. They have a system which requires advertisers to submit evidence of nutrient profiling as they submit scripts and their ads for clearance. So in which case, many of you listening will have experience of that system, and our advice would be that that is a good place to start in terms of creating your approach to dealing with the new non-broadcast code.
And would that Clearcast process then be used by companies, or is it just that you're recommending a similar approach?
Yes, the Clearcast obviously deal only with TV advertising, so they're not going to play a part in the non-broadcast side of things, but using the approach that you would take for a television ad in terms of assembling your evidence is probably a sensible way of having the necessary evidence should the ASA come calling after a complaint's received. Now understanding what an HFSS product is, what is an HFSS product advertisement? Well, I think this is pretty self-evident. In one part, it is effectively an ad that directly promotes a particular product that under the nutrient profiling scheme is considered to be HFSS. However, the new rules go further than that. CAP was concerned that there are instances where branding that is synonymous with specific HFSS products could have the effect of promoting it even though the product itself is not present. We've published new guidance alongside the HFSS rules which deals with this question about identifying branding likely to promote an HFSS product. It's based on existing BCAP guidance which has been in place for around 10 years, but it does feature some revisions and changes to attempt to improve that and make much clearer to advertisers where they need to be cautious about the use of branding as opposed to simple product references. The key to it is where we're looking to identify any form of branding, and by branding we have quite a broad definition, so it could be anything strapline, celeb, licensed or brand character, or anything else that passes this test of something that is synonymous with a specific HFSS product. The new branding adopts 3 criteria for different types of branding in terms of how they are likely to promote or not promote an HFSS product. The first one is where we have a piece of branding that is for a specific product. The branding was created to identify that product. It appears effectively as a symbol for that product wherever it should be, on packaging, on posters, etc., etc. It is very difficult to argue that those images, that branding, that character, etc., do anything other than promote the product for which they were created for. In that case, if the product is HFSS, the use of the branding, even if the product isn't present, is likely to have the effect of promoting that product and therefore will be treated in the same way as an ad including the HFSS product. We recognise that some branding can be broader, so branding for a range of products. The brand denotes several different variants underneath its identity, but again, it is something which was designed for the purposes of promoting that range. In that instance, there is still a potential for a range of products that is significantly HFSS, i.e. it is more than 50% HFSS, and to be promoted by using that piece of branding. So we think that that test, the HFSS, so the 50% test, is the appropriate bar to show where advertising of a brand related to a range is likely to have the effect of promoting an HFSS product.
So if I had a range of, let's say, snack products that I wanted to advertise, which ran across that profile, so some would pass the profile and some would fail, can I still advertise the single product that is not deemed HFSS?
Yes. These restrictions, the guidance, etc., apply specifically to HFSS product advertisements. And so one key piece of advice in terms of compliance is advertising using non-HFSS variants. Again, if you use just the sort of the general range branding, then the ASA will make an assessment in relation to this 50% test. Another thing to note as well, if you put the actual products, all of the products in a particular range in an ad, so let's say rather than just the brand that denotes them but actually depict all of the products, the ASA will judge you by the lowest common denominator. If one of those products that you depict as HFSS, it will be treated as an HFSS product ad. The third criteria here is for company level branding. This is possibly where it gets more complicated. What the guidance does is establish a test to pick through the different instances where we might find company level branding that has the effect of promoting an HFSS product. We recognise that company level branding is further removed from branding which was created for a specific product or a range. It identifies often a corporate entity, a set of ideas and so forth and products, etc. However, because company branding is inherently related to the range of products the company sells, there is a potential for that range to be mainly HFSS and to therefore present a potential problem. The test that we have established is one where basically if the company is synonymous with the provision of HFSS products, its branding would fall foul of the HFSS rules unless they can demonstrate that they are also synonymous with something else. So the principal defence in the guidance would be a co-synonymity with the provision of non-HFSS products. The company sells lots of HFSS products, but it also sells lots of non-HFSS products. Additionally to that, another one of the criteria in the guidance is that the company can show that they also have other business activities, other areas. So for instance, they sell non-food products or provide other forms of services. This is an area which is going to have to be fleshed out through ASA rulings, so advertisers are advised to exercise caution. The ASA will have the final say. So we've looked at the building blocks of the new policies. So what do the actual rules say? The key change in the code is the addition of Rule 15.18, which is a rule restricting the placement of HFSS product ads. Rule 15.18 says that products cannot be directed at under 16s to the selection of media or context in which they appear, and no media may be used if more than 25% of its audience is 16 or above. The onus is going to be on advertisers to make sure they don't do this, and the key tool in order to do that is that advertisers should have an idea before they publish a marketing communication of the likely audience.
So it's basically the company's responsibility to make sure that they are complying with these new rules. Obviously, as a food company, you maybe won't have the detail of that media. So how would they go about knowing whether they're meeting that 25% audience rule?
The crucial thing is to ensure that you are working with agencies, media owners and so forth to get the best possible data. If you have good, solid data which shows that your audience for the media that you've chosen to advertise in is less than 25% under 16, that is the strongest possible evidence that you can provide to the ASA. It's not the only evidence and it's certainly not compulsory. As we'll see shortly, there are instances where basically audience data is not a defence. So for instance, if you're putting your ad directly into media which is overtly for children, a kids magazine, a kids website and so forth, then the ASA is likely to find that to be problematic. Alternatively, there might be options to use account data, for instance on social networks, to use that to basically target your advertising at particular groups of people who are less likely to be under 16 and more likely by their interest, their likes, their follows and so forth to be over 16. We have chosen a specific approach to the media placement restriction, which is based on long established CAP policies around alcohol and gambling. Two sort of tips here. Firstly, we've published some guidance which is available on our website about media placement and about the evidence and data which you are required to provide. But at the same time, a lot of media owners already have restrictions in place and approaches to dealing with alcohol and gambling advertising. Certainly, while the new food rules are in their infancy and the ASA is beginning its enforcement and hasn't made clear the sort of the grey areas and boundaries of that, one sort of default low risk approach is to adopt or ask the media owners to adopt the approach they would otherwise take with alcohol gambling advertising as an interim to minimise the risks. So here we have some examples of the media restriction in relation, as I noted before, to children's media. If it's media which is overtly for children, then you really shouldn't be putting ads which are not, which are restricted for that group around that media. Most of the time this is obvious, and you've got some examples there in terms of magazines and also some websites and social media characters who have a very clear slant in their appeal.
I notice you've also got a picture of a school there.
Yes, outdoor advertising is an interesting example. In general, outdoor advertising is taken to be generally targeted, so it targets the population at large. The population of under 16s is below 20%, so in general, outdoor advertising is okay. However, CAP and the ASA and decisions that it's made recognise that in certain spaces, poster sites, for instance, within proximity to a school, are likely to slant that audience towards the under 16 group.
And so is there a specific distance, for example, from the school that you're not meant to advertise?
The ASA, in a ruling about gambling, noted the importance of 100 metres. So moving on, here we have an example of media which have a broader appeal, and this is where the 25% threshold comes in. And this is where it is beholden upon advertisers to collect the appropriate data in order to satisfy the ASA that in picking a particular medium to advertise, you have basically got it right in terms of having the less than 25% of audience of under 16s. In terms of data sources, magazines obviously have circulation figures. Cinema example, the Cinema Advertising Association has a system, a long-established system in place for effectively comparing audiences of new films with existing films in order to properly profile that film and identify films which might have too high a representation of under 18s. That's for the purposes of alcohol restrictions, but as I said before, that type of approach is also relevant here, certainly for the interim. In terms of online environments, it is a bit more complicated as measurement is not as well established, but there are data providers. Also, there are proprietary data providers in the forms of websites themselves and the analytics that they can provide. It's for the advertiser to go out and assemble the best case that they possibly can on the data sources that they have to satisfy the ASA that they haven't fallen foul of the must not be directed at test. So that's the placement restriction. If you complied and you put your ad in an appropriate place which isn't directed at under 16s, you still have to be wary of the fact that the rules also have requirements in relation to the content of ads. This applies in all other spaces. Basically, if you're directing an ad in a non-child oriented media at children through the use of certain types of content, so for instance, it directly talks to children or has very particular appeal through cartoon characters or imagery or the general feel and context of the ad, or even games which are simple and sort of aimed at kids, then the content restrictions in addition to the placement restrictions require that you can't use promotions, licensed characters or celebrities. And in the subsequent slides, I'll just run through those individually.
So just to be clear on that then, Andy, and let's take an extreme example. If I was advertising in the Financial Times, so clearly not aiming at children, however, I used a, let's say, Peppa Pig image, that would still be restricted because the image is of appeal to younger children.
The rules would apply irrespective of the media, so yes, the Financial Times and so forth still be covered. However, I think the assessment the ASA make is broader than simply just the imagery. It's about the general approach of the ad. So it might be reasonable for an advertiser to use such imagery, but to direct the ad very clearly at parents. So a promotion for a consumer as a parent to, I don't know, for a holiday or a resort or something to do with a particular brand. So the use of such characters is a risk factor. It's not entirely impossible, but companies need to be aware of the danger and just ensure that they are clearly, when they're using this type of imagery, they are talking to the adults, so they can't be considered to be caught by those rules. Okay, firstly, taking the promotions rule. A promotion is basically as an incentive to buy a product based on an added element, an added benefit to it. So the classic is obviously 2 for the price of 1, but it can be a whole variety of things, including competitions and prize draws. We know these are quite popular. Basically, if you're directing your ad is placed appropriately, but you're directing it through its content at under 12s, then you can't use a promotional offer.
But to clarify, that is specifically within an advert. So for example, you could still have something on packaging which has promotional activities.
Yes, the rules are focused on advertising, and the code applies slightly more broadly to promotional marketing and direct marketing, and sometimes those disciplines exist outside what we would consider to be advertising around the concept of a paid for space. These rules focus on advertising. They don't cover on-pack promotions because the CAP code does not regulate on-pack, it just regulates the technical aspects of promotions on packaging. Okay, moving on to the second part of this, characters and celebrities. Similar to the example from promotions, if your content of your ad is directed at under 12s, then you can't use licensed characters or celebrities that are popular with children. Note, because children tend to find aspiration in older kids' content and so forth, the directed in terms of the content of the media is about under 12s, but in terms of the appeal of the celebrity or licensed character, we're talking about all children under 16s. This is something the ASA will judge. We have some examples on there of things that are likely to be an issue with this. It is an area where the ASA is going to have to make decisions on a case-by-case basis, but the key thing is it's something for the advertiser to hold in hand in terms of demonstrating what the likely appeal audience, etc., is for that character or celebrity if they're using it in such an ad.
And I suppose coming back to sort of earlier questions really, how would a company know the appeal of, I mean, I noticed you've got David Williams there, who I tend to think of as an adult entertainer, although clearly writes children's books. How is a company meant to make that kind of a judgment?
I think in most of the instances it will be straightforward. You can see the various cartoon characters that we've got, for instance the Blue Peter presenters as well. They have an audience in their sort of day job as being presenters of a television show. It is somewhere, you know, we're looking for arguments based on appeal in terms of popularity. The David Williams example is a balance because of his sort of dual identities. You know, the more, as we've said with previous things, previous provisions within this, the more that you go toward the grey area, the more risk there is for advertisers. But the key thing is that you have to come up with your arguments in terms of why that individual is not of appeal if you want to use them in these specific circumstances. And finally, it's just worth talking about equity brand characters whilst talking about characters and celebrities. Owing to the evidence base being mainly focused on licensed characters rather than those created by brands themselves, there is no specific and explicit restriction on the use of characters created by companies, created by advertisers. So these can still be used. However, to be very clear, they are branding, and that means that they are covered by the provisions of the restrictions under the terms of the brand guidance. So it's something to be careful of. A brief overview before we finish. The core of this is the use of the Department of Health nutrient profiling model. That will identify HFSS products. You are required as advertisers to have done the working out. If you are advertising a non-HFSS product, it is always useful to have that working out in hand should a complaint be made, so you can satisfy the ASA that you are not covered by the rules. If an ad features or has the effect of promoting a product, then simply put, get the placement right. Don't put it in children's media or media where the audience is over 25% under 16. And in other spaces, you need to ensure that if your content is targeting children under the age of 12, that you don't include promotions, licensed characters or celebrities. Finally, a useful watchword throughout all of this is that the rules do not apply to non-HFSS products. So there are significant options there in terms of using those where you have them available in the product ranges that you offer as the basis of your advertising. Finally, just a word on resources. We appreciate as CAP, a body focused on helping the industry to comply with the codes, that this is a big change and you need assistance and help to make sure that you're getting it right. Firstly, please do follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates in terms of new guidance and new information that's presented, and that gives you a real understanding of what's going on, not just with food, but also with policy matters in terms of advertising regulation more generally. We have a variety of newsletters, the insight and update articles which you can sign up for on our website. At the same time, I can't recommend enough the CAP Copy Advice service. This is free, bespoke advice on your copy or ad concepts and so forth, or even specific questions of code interpretation and so forth. You can contact the Copy Advice team via the details on our website, and they pretty much turn most inquiries around within 24 hours. At the same time, on our website, if you go to the advice and guidance section, we have a whole variety of articles in our advice online database which cover a huge range of topics, including food advertising. There are also more dedicated advertising guidance notes. I noted during the presentation we have some placement guidance, and that's available if you search through our advice library. And also we have presentations which we run periodically on the codes, on various elements of the codes, our advice AMs, and also you can contact our events team at events.asa.org.uk if you have any bespoke training needs. Just finally, with regard to food, please do go to the CAP website. That is now, I should say, part of the new unified ASA website, which we have recently launched. So basically, if you go to asa.org.uk and then click on the icon at the top, which takes you through to the CAP part of the site, we have some insight articles called quick Q&As, which give you some of the details of what we've spoken about today. And there's also, as I said, guidance on branding and media placement. We recently held an Advice AM session. We may well hold another one later this year, and I believe that the FDF are about to put links to these documents just below this presentation as you're watching it, so please do follow through and go to those.
Well, thanks very much, Andy, for a comprehensive overview there of the new CAP guidelines. As Andy just mentioned, we do link through to a whole range of resources which CAP are providing to support companies, and you can find that on our website where you've accessed this webinar from. Alternatively, if you do have any questions, feel free to email FDF through our website and we'll come back to you with the relevant information.